Let's start off with something that if you're a beginner filmmaker, you may have not even thought about it. Yes, these are filters, and I'm really sorry, but you're gonna need them in order to get that amazing cinematic footage. I mean, if you're starting, you can still learn without them, and that's fine, but I'm really sorry if you didn't plan to, spend some extra money on these, because you will have to. This is why usually I recommend buying the Fly More combos when we're talking about DJI drones, or saving some money, because this should be the first thing that you purchase right after the drone. In today's video, we're gonna be talking about Freewell's filters. They sent me kindly a free unit, but this video is not sponsored, or they do not have any control over what I'm gonna say, and they have not seen the video before. So let's go inside. Even though the Mavic 3 has a variable aperture from f2.8 to f11, which indeed helps us a lot to in some occasions not using ND filters, still we need them for very bright days. And if your drone doesn't even have adjustable aperture, then you need filters right away. Simply put, we do have three categories, and this applies to pretty much every single camera out there. You may have heard about them before, and you're gonna need to play and to learn how to use them in order to get the result. ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. If you shoot in auto mode, the processor will play with those three settings in order to get a correctly exposed image. But the problem is, in a very sunny day, it will boost up the shutter speed, and especially in drones, we'll get that famous jello effect in our footage. But no panic, let me explain this step by step. First, the aperture. You may have heard me in some previous videos saying that it's just a hole where the light gets into the image sensor. It is measured in f numbers. The lower the f number, the wider open that hole on the camera is. And thus, the more light gets into the sensor. This means, especially at night or low light scenarios, you want to have a really low f number, because you want really a lot of light and as much light as possible getting into the sensor. In the case of the Mavic 3, it is f2.8, which is the lowest aperture that this drone has. It goes also up to f11, but we're going to be talking about this later. Because when you're filming out there in a super bright and sunny day, this is where these little babies get into the game. Because you want to block some light getting into the sensor, and as you cannot do it, especially in some other drones, you don't have adjustable apertures. This drone does, but still, you may need even a little bit more than f11. You need something blocking the light in order to adjust the other settings right to get the cinematic footage. Or otherwise, your footage will look like this, super overexposed, bright and white, and you just, this is garbage. For example, you're shooting in auto mode in a super bright and sunny day, and then this happens. The shutter speed goes all the way up, and the problem is that, especially when using drones, that footage will have that famous jello effect. It's gonna be terrible, or it's gonna be looking super crispy, and basically summing up, you just won't see this as cinematic as it should be. On the filters, you'll get some numbers like ND4, ND8, ND16, and so on. The higher the ND number, the more light gets blocked. And in terms of quality, when talking about ND filters, the better the quality of the filter, the less it will affect the image with, chromatic aberrations, changing colors and all stuff like that. So it's important that you save some money and get some good filters. And just a small tip here, even though the Mavic 3 is able to get from f2.8 to f11, you may think that it's fine, you can use either 2.8 or 11. Well, there's something called the sweet spot, and just generally in cameras it's around f4, f5.6 is where the image sensor and where the camera shines and gets the best quality out there. So it's better to use a higher ND filter but staying at f4 than using a lower ND filter and going up, for example, to f11. There's gonna be a slight image quality difference, and trust me, this is a good tip. And now let's jump directly into the second category, ISO. This is the situation, right, when you with your eyes are looking at, it's night, you have low light, there are some colors that are, you just can't really see colors and know whether something is orange or red, right? Well, the same happens with the cameras and with the image sensor in this case. So the sensor tells the camera or the processor like, hey, I don't really know what color this thing right in front of me has right now, so I'm just gonna come up with something that I do believe is what it is. And this is what happens with ISO. And as a general rule, the ISO, you want to keep it as low as possible. On the Mavic 3, the lowest ISO possible, and pretty much on most drones, is 100. So the perfect situation would be if you could maintain the ISO at 100, because cameras are not perfect, and basically the noise, and when you go up with ISO, those artifacts, that noise, is actually bad lit pixels, as I told you before. So you want to avoid going always super high. Probably this drone start creating artifacts at ISO 800 or 1600, so you generally want to try to avoid that if possible. And then third and the last one is the shutter speed. Oh dear, the shutter speed. How many videos are out there talking about you should do this and this and this, and it's pretty simple. However, you just gotta know when to use which shutter speed. But I was sent from outer space to help you on this one too, and basically you have to follow one rule and you'll be safe. For example, if you're shooting in 24, 25, sometimes 30 FPS, which is 99% of the cinematic footage that you want to be filming are going to be with those frame rates, because film historically has been always in 24p, and you know, we want to get that motion blur and all that. All you got to do is always have double the shutter speed than the frame rate, which means that in the case of shooting in 24 or 25 FPS, you want to use a shutter speed of 50. Easily explained, a shutter speed of 150 would mean that you are lighting up a 50th of a second those frames. This would be easier understood on analog photography because we still have those shutters and all that, and right now we're using digital shutters on drones. But keep to that thumb rule: 24 or 25 FPS, 50 shutter speed, and if you're shooting, for example, at 60 FPS for some slow-mo, you want to go to 120 shutter speed. This will give you that blur and motion effect that I'm talking. When we think about cinematic movies or films, we always think about something in motion. Most beginners have that misconception that videos must be perfectly sharp and perfectly, like stop motion, but eventually you learn that you want to have some motion, like this video that you're watching now, right? My hands are not fully sharp, they are blurred out, right, when I move them like them, so you want to achieve that with drones as well. So summing up, these are the settings that you're most of the time going to be using if you want to achieve that cinematic look, which is going to be ISO 100, shutter speed 150, and probably you're going to be using an ND filter, probably 16 or 32. And just I forgot to mention that Freewell filters are also polarized. PL stands for, and you'll see this in many filters out there, which will avoid reflections, especially on water, glass, or some buildings. You're going to be avoiding that reflection getting into the sensor and thus having a little bit more of quality. And the filters are so important because without them, you're not able most of the time to get a 150 shutter speed and a ISO 100 when shooting in 24 or 25 FPS. As I told you, the shutter speed rockets up and you need these to get down. So if you want to check them out, and really you need good filters, check the link in the description for the Freewell filters. Nothing really else to say, guys. I really hope that you enjoyed this type of video. Sometimes more informative and tutorial-wise videos are also really helpful. I hope that you enjoyed the explanation of the filters. We're doing always videos with the Mavic 3, with some other DJI gear and all that. So stay tuned, leave the thumb if you have not yet, and sub, because you get some nice and sexy content. Nothing really else to say, guys. Always remember to keep calm and talk UAV.